Welcome to episode 23 of the Credit Card BS podcast. My name is Sean. I'm the UC Berkeley graduate that created and taught the university-sponsored course on credit card rewards. I'm coming at you today from Alila's Villas Uluwatu, a beautiful, beautiful property, a Hyatt property in Asia that is redeemable with points and free night certificates. I'm here today with my co-host, Sherwin.
Hi everyone, I'm Sherwin, very excited to join Sean today for today's episode. I'm a Stanford student who got into the points and miles hobby more than a year ago, and since then I've opened a bunch of cards and accumulated a lot of points, here to share some of the lessons I've learned along the way with you. The reason our podcast is called the Credit Card BS podcast, as many of you know by now, the initials B and S refer to the schools Sean and I attend respectively, Berkeley and Stanford. But as always, we've put aside our differences today to talk about credit card rewards. So today's episode, cents per point, why it matters, and a hot take about it. So Sean, let's start off and kind of define what do we mean by cents per point? You'll hear people call this CPP as well. So what is it and how do we calculate it?
Yeah, so cents per point is basically just taking the cash price of some redemptions, like the retail standard cash price, and then dividing it like into how many points you're paying for that redemption value. And then you'll get some amount of cents per point in terms of cents per point that each point is worth towards that redemption, toward that specific redemption, and then it's like some value of it. So for example, if a item or a redemption costs $900, but it's only costing you 30,000 points, you'd be saying you're getting a cents per point value of 3 cents per point that you're spending toward that redemption. And so, yeah, that's like it's a very standard metric, and it's a very like important metric that arguably one of the most important metrics of like how you're getting value out of your redemption, because it's the only objective metric that we can really track in terms of like how much value you're getting for your points toward a specific redemption.
Yes, so now that we've kind of explained what cents per point is, I want to start off with a claim that I often hear a lot of people make, is that cents per point is an overrated metric, right? It doesn't actually matter that much, and people should stop trying to spend so much energy optimizing to get the highest cents per point possible and milk every last drop of value out of every single point. And instead, one should pick the redemptions that work most for them or that they're most excited about, regardless if it's the highest CPP. And, CPP isn't even that accurate in the first place because the cash prices are overinflated and, you wouldn't have paid cash for that high-end hotel or business or first-class flight anyway. So using CPP is misleading. So this is a claim Sean and I hear a lot. But before we kind of are able to address this claim and kind of give our take on it, I think it's important to kind of start with a couple of premises. So the first one is the difference between value and savings. So Sean, do you kind of want to elaborate on that for us a little bit?
Yes. So when we talk about value versus savings, here's what we mean. Let's say there is a flight that you needed to take and that you were going to take, and you were going to pay $1,000 for that flight. But you were able to redeem points, let's say, 50,000 points for that flight instead. We would say you have saved $1,000 of cash value because you were going to pay for it, you were willing to pay that value, and now you don't have to pay that. Now, when we talk about value, though, it gets a little trickier. So let's say I redeem for a $10,000 business class flight. Now, I was never going to pay $10,000 for that flight. There's no universe in which I would have paid $10,000 or anywhere near that for that flight. But I am still getting that $10,000 flight, whether or not I was willing to pay for it or not. So we wouldn't say I saved $10,000. We would, in terms of how much we saved, it gets a bit trickier, right? Because maybe I was only willing to pay $1,000 for the economy flight, but maybe I would have been willing to pay a little bit more to upgrade a business. So the amount of savings get tricky, but the value I'd be getting is $10,000. That's like in terms of, that's what it's worth. Regardless if that's what I want to pay or not, regardless if that's an overinflated price, that is what the price is. So that's how much value I'd be getting out of it, because that's the only way objectively we can track it in terms of what they're selling it for. So that's what we mean when we say value versus savings. So no one's arguing that like if you're redeeming for these ultra aspirational things, you're technically saving that much money because you would never have spent it. But you are getting that much value out of it. And there's no real way to, I think, argue that because it's an objective metric.
Yeah, so going back to today's topic, when we talk about cent per point, we're calculating it based on like the cash retail price of whatever flight or hotel we're looking at. So we are kind of going with that value metric. We're still going to keep savings in the back of our head, but that's not primarily what we use to calculate cents per point. And this is a very important distinction, I think, that really addresses kind of the core claims here being made about cents per point. So now that we've kind of clarified value versus savings, I'm going to start with my take on cents per point. The take is people who say that it's overinflated, doesn't matter that much, just focus on your redemptions. That is a wrong take, and I strongly disagree with it. And to kind of explain my reasoning here, I'm going to start with an important premise or important assumption. Using points does not make something free. When I redeem X number of points for some kind of redemption, I didn't get it for free merely because I didn't pay cash. I paid those X number of points, and the points are merely a currency I'm paying. Those X number of points could have been made for redemption A, and that meant I forwent using those points that could have been used for redemption B. There's always an opportunity cost there. Would you agree with this general premise?
I would fully agree with that premise. And I would even want to take it a little step further here, in that not only points are a separate currency, points have a cash value to them. For example, right now I'm staying at Alila Villas Uluwatu. I redeemed 30,000 World of Hyatt points per night, which I transferred over from Chase Ultimate Rewards. At a bare minimum, I could have cashed out those points directly into a Chase bank account at 1 cent a point. So this is not a free hotel stay. It is not. I cannot argue it is a truly free stay. Like, yes, for marketing, I could say, I'm staying for free or whatever, but it's not truly free. I'm paying a minimum of $300 a night to be here, because instead of cashing those points out into my Chase bank account, I chose to transfer them to Hyatt and redeem for here. So this is a $300 a night hotel room, any way you look at it. So points are never free. They are a currency. They have a cash value to them. And when you're redeeming them for poor rates, and if you're just not caring about cents per point, it just means you're paying more of that currency. It's never truly free.
Yeah, absolutely. I would agree. I'd even take it even further. What when you said is when you even make a transaction on a points earning card, let's say it's like a Roll of Hyatt credit card or an American Airlines credit card, and it earns you like 1 point per dollar, right? That point you got from that transaction is not free, because I could have similarly made that transaction on a 2% cash back card and gotten 2% cash back. But instead, I chose to swipe it on a different card that earned me some number of points, right? So in these examples, I spent 2 cents to acquire that 1 point from the credit card. It's not free, even though it sounds like a rebate. It's free because compared to paying cash, I got something I wouldn't else have gotten. But in my kind of analysis, no, I paid 2 cents to acquire that mile because that would have been what I would have otherwise gotten from a baseline cashback card. Sean, would you agree with that take?
100%. I think that's a very good take. And what you're effectively doing then is you're buying points, which is something that so many people are so against. Say never buy points, never buy points. But you are buying points every day. If you're using a points credit card, you're effectively buying points. You're just doing it at a more competitive rate than what they, sell them publicly at. And so that's something to really keep in mind. If you're using, for example, if you're getting 1x Hyatt point instead of 2% cashback, you're paying 2 cents per point for that Hyatt point. That's objectively what you're doing. There's no difference. It may feel different emotionally, but at the end of the day, you're doing the exact same thing. And so I think it's really important to understand that everything is an opportunity cost. There's no such thing as free. Even on the sign-up bonuses. Let's say, you earn 90,000 points as part of a sign-up bonus, and then you spend it on a hotel stay because it feels free. It's not free. You had $900 that you earned that you could have cashed out, and then you use that to hotel stays. It's not free in any sense. That's like saying, oh, I worked a couple hours at my shift and I got some money, so my lunch is now free because no, it's not free. You just work more and then you use that money to pay for it. Same thing here. You earned a sign-up bonus. You're using that to pay for your redemptions is not free. Now, I'm not saying to cash out all your points or anything like that, because that's not what I do. It's not what I'd recommend doing, but it's still not free.
Yes, I think it's important to separate what I call like the acquisition cost from the redemption cost. Even if the sign-up bonus felt like it was free, and it basically is, to me, once those points are deposited into my account, they're no longer free. Even if I got them, like when I'm making the calculation of whether to get a card, I do consider them free points as part of sign-up bonus. But once I've gotten them, the free aspect of it has disappeared because now they have a particular value. It is kind of a duty to try to maximize the value of the points, just like I would maximize the value of the cash in my bank account, right? I don't think there's any difference economically in how you should be thinking about these. I think Sean's example is really good, right? Like just because you worked a little extra to get more money doesn't mean the thing you spent that money for is now free. Because otherwise, it would be like saying, I can spend my money frivolously because a portion of it was like a bonus in addition to my salary, or a portion of it was extra hours at work that's beyond what I'm normally paid. I don't think we would make that sort of distinction. It's still in our best interest to maximize the money that we have, regardless of how we got it. And therefore, I would make the same argument that it's our best interest to maximize the value of our points, regardless of whether we got it in a free sign-up bonus way or whether we bought those points or any other method you might have gotten them. So I feel like once the points are in my account, they have a tangible value to them, and we should maximize their value as I would maximize the value of the cash in my bank account.
I agree. And I want to throw in one other interesting point here, that whenever you transfer points to a transferable or to like any currency, so let's say I'm transferring my Chase points to Hyatt or Amex points to Aeroplan or whatever, the maximum cents per point that you are actually getting in that transfer, okay, in that transfer from Amex to Aeroplan or UR to Hyatt, the max CPP you're getting is the minimum of the cost to purchase those points directly from the airline or the hotel. And so let's say, Hyatt points are being sold by Hyatt at 1.7 cents per point. If I transfer UR to Hyatt, I just redeem my Chase points at 1.7 cents per point to buying Hyatt points effectively in that transfer. Now, I'm not saying you can't get higher value when redeeming the points for something, but the max value I just got when transferring is 1.7 cents. I don't see how any other way you can argue that, like, oh, I got 10 cents per point by transferring to Hyatt. No, you didn't. You got 1.7, and then you just redeem for higher value. Now, yes, there's like a cap on the number of points you can buy within each program each year, but I feel like a lot of people aren't hitting that cap nearly. And also, like with programs like Hyatt where you can transfer freely from other accounts, let's say your player 2 buys points as well on sale. And so like the cap doesn't really become that much of an issue. And so I think it's like something to consider because, for example, like a lot of people transfer Amex points over to Avianca Life Miles, which sells their points very cheap often. Like I think like below 1.3 cents per point. And so you're getting 1.3 cents per point for your Amex points then. You're not getting like, even if you're redeeming for first class with those points, you're not getting like 5 to 10 cents per point. You're getting 1.3 and then you're just redeeming for higher value. So I think it's like something interesting to consider because there are cases back when like the Schwab card was cashing out at 1.25 where you could cash out your Schwab points or your Amex points into Schwab, use that money to buy Avianca Life Miles and still end up with like more Avianca Life Miles than if you had transferred directly. So I think it's like a very interesting opportunity cost you have to consider, and that like whenever you're transferring points, you're just getting the value of whatever it costs to buy those points. You're not getting 5-10 cents per point. You're getting like usually 2 cents per point at most because that's what it costs to buy them. What are your thoughts on that?
I completely agree with the small caveat that most points programs have a limit on how many points you can buy each year. For most people, that limit is adequate for the redemptions they want to do in that year, so it's not really going to affect our analysis. But assuming it does affect analysis, assuming like the limit is something you would be hitting, and there's not an easy way for other people to buy you points, it might change the analysis a little bit. But generally, I would agree, and that's why Sean and I have emphasized over and over again on this podcast never to transfer your points to bad partners such as IHG or Marriott, which both transfer 1-to-1 from Chase and Marriott also transfers 101 from American Express, I believe. But it's just horrible value because you can buy IHG points or Marriott points at less than 1 cent per point when they're on sale. So you're literally losing money by doing that. If you really needed IHG points, you could cash out your points and then at 1 cent per point and then buy the points so it would be a 1-to-2 transfer ratio in a sense. And because you can do that, I would just save my points for a better redemption.
Yeah, I think that's a very good point. I think like that's something to always like really consider. Like buying points isn't as evil as everyone kind of makes it out to be. Just if you're transferring your points to a poor partner and it's costing you, it's effectively costing you money in that case. Like if you were literally just flushing money down the toilet, for example, like in the IHG, there's no reason to ever transfer a single point to IHG ever, unless they have some super rare mega like 300-400% transfer bonus. Other than that, never transfer your points to IHG.
I mean, even if it was 1-to-2, even if it was 1-to-2, I wouldn't transfer my IHG points because I can get way more value even from a 1-to-1 transfer to Hyatt. So you really got to do the math. Not all points are the same, basically. Now, I want to steer us back to our central conversation today about cents per point and why I think the take that cents per point is a little overrated is basically completely wrong. I'm going to return to this idea of opportunity cost and scarcity, right? So I think a lot of people fall into this mindset trap. I need to take this trip anyway. I need to go on this flight or I need to book a hotel because I need to go there regardless. I'm going to use points to help defray the cost of the flight or the hotel. Even if it's not huge cents per point, it's something I needed to do anyway. And by not having to pay money for something I otherwise would have had to do, I got good value for my points because I'm maximizing toward what I need rather than the most cents per point. Okay, this is a wrong take. And, I'm going to be a little controversial here. I think it is mathematically unsound. I think we need to think about the scarcity aspect with respect to cash and points. Right? In my opinion, if you're not getting good value with points on a redemption, you should just pay cash for that trip. If it's a trip you have to do, sure. You can still go, but you should pay cash and save your points for a higher level redemption. And why is that? I think you can always make more money or increase your income, but points are a lot scarcer, unless you're opening sign-up bonuses like every other month or like have a huge spend for like a big business or something. It's hard to accumulate a large number of points to do aspirational travel, right? So I think we need to be focusing on outsized value and saving our points for those things we otherwise literally cannot pay cash for. For the things that we can pay cash for, pay cash and then save those points, those things later. Again, it's not going to become free just because you use points on something. You just threw away some value that would have otherwise gone elsewhere because, again, points inherently have value, as we've talked about. And that's why, for example, for me, if I'm trying to do domestic travel in the United States, it's hard to get outside cents per point value. So I end up just paying cash for my flights and then saving my points for like more aspirational hotel stays or international flights on upper cabins. But generally, because I don't think points are free, I'm just going to be paying cash for the low cents per point stuff and then saving my points for higher value thing. And it's not like I am not optimizing something because, I'm not using points for the things I need to do anyway. I'm paying more cash. I'm not paying any more cash by doing this that someone is paying more some kind of currency in choosing to use points for a bad redemption. I think I've rambled on a little bit here, but you get the point. So I want to turn it to Sean and ask if he has any takes on this.
So I pretty much agree with like all your takes there. I think especially with the mindset trap, I hate that mindset trap of, I gotta do it anyways, so I'm just gonna burn all my points. And look, I want to be clear here. We're talking to a very specific audience, okay? I get it. If you're someone that like has one credit card, never does any research into redemptions, never does any research into points, and let's say that's just not your thing, and then you use points for that, I can't knock you too much because you're never probably going to redeem your points that high of value anyways. But this is a credit card podcast here, and we're talking to people that are doing research into credit cards. Presumably, you're into credit cards in this field if you're watching a credit card themed podcast. So for those people specifically, that's when you really need to be focusing on your higher value. Like, if you're going to be doing research into this field, if you're going to be spending time figuring this stuff out, you can't just go burn your points on poor redemptions. Because Sherwin is right. Points are a finite resource. They have a cash value. You cannot just go out and earn infinite of them unless you have a mega high spend, unless you're opening cards left and right nonstop, and you have too many points. They are a finite resource that are difficult to acquire to some degree. And if you're spending time in research into this area, you need to be focusing on something that is higher value. And I understand like the super aspirational stuff isn't necessarily for everyone. I get that. But like even on budget travel, you can still find higher value from your points. Like there are, international economy flights that you can get decent deals on. There are even some domestic economy flights you can get some very good deals on. And there are budget hotels, for example, with Hyatt that you can get good deals on. You can do city points to choice at a 1 to 2 rate to get good deals on budget stays. You can buy Wyndham points on sale to get good deals on vacation rentals for very, very cheap prices. There are ways to optimize, whether it be aspirational or budget, you can get high cents per point. It's not something that like it's only for the super luxurious stuff. Like, yes, it is better for the super luxurious stuff, but you can get good value across the whole like spectrum of travel redemptions. So it's something you always just need to think about, that these are a currency. And if you're paying bad value for them, you're paying more of that currency. You're just paying a more expensive price than someone else if you were to save your points. And I think
Right.
like your point of like you can always earn more money. Like, yes, it is tough to earn more money, but it is something everyone should be trying to do anyways. And so if you're willing to pay your points, that is money. You're paying money. Like it's no different than paying cash. It's the same thing. You're just paying more of that. And what you're doing is, instead of paying money, which is a finite fixed value for that redemption, you're paying points which potentially have higher value. Like you can't get higher value for your cash or higher savings for your cash because that's a fixed value. But your points are more of a fluctuating currency, which could be redeemed for something of much higher value. And you're choosing to forego that for something of poor value, if that makes sense. Like if I have a $1,000 Target gift card and then I go and spend it, let's say I convert that to $500 cash, that seems like a poor value to me. And that's because you could have taken that $1,000 Target gift card and purchased things worth $1,000 with it. And those things would presumably be useful at some point in time because, there's a lot of options, if that makes sense. So that's kind of what you're doing when you're taking your points and redeeming them at poor value. You're, all those future options that you had that had higher value or even higher savings, you're now foregoing that because you just thought, oh, I had to do it anyways, and so therefore I'm going to do it. But that's not really what this game is about. That's not, if that's your mindset, you should not be spending that much time on the credit card game. You're not probably getting the highest yield for your time investment.
Yeah, I agree. I always find it very unfortunate when people, pay annual fee for credit card. Like a simple example, I know people who only have the Chase Sapphire Preferred, right? And they're paying $95 annual fee. They're earning 1x points on everything, and then they redeem their points using the Chase Travel Portal at 1.25 cents per point. And they're like, wow, I got flights for free. This is an amazing card. And that's just sad to me because, no offense to anyone in particular, but when you're like, you would be doing better with a 2% cashback card straight up because you're basically getting 1.25% back on your purchases. But if you just got a 2% cashback card, you could take the cash, you could invest it, and even get more value. Cash is more flexible. It could be things beyond flights, right? So, it's very misleading to say, oh, I got free flights. It's more like, oh, I messed up my credit card strategy and I'm only getting 1.25% back, so 2%. So that's kind of my more cynical, but I think mathematically sound take. I mean, I wrote this down once, actually, that I think I want to get Sean's take on. So I said, if I make redemption A at 2 cents per point, by saving the points I would have used toward redemption B at 1.25 cents per point, and instead paying cash for redemption B. That's the same as buying points at 1.25 cents per point. And therefore, if I am willing to buy, let's say, ultimate rewards points at 1.25 cents per point, I would not make redemption B. Would you agree with that take?
Could you repeat that again? So you're saying if you make redemption B, repeat that
let me
again.
say it
Sorry, I
again
got
because
lost
it's a bit complicated, and I want to make sure everyone understands. Okay, let's say if I make redemption A at 2 cents per point, by saving the points I would have used toward redemption B at 1.25 cents per point. So instead of doing the 1.25 cents per point, I chose to save those points, use them for a later trip. That's 2 cents per point. That's the same as buying the points for 1.25 cents per point, right?
Yes.
Okay, and therefore, if I'm willing to buy this type of currency at 1.25 cents per point, it would be foolish for me to spend those points on that 1.25 cents per point redemption. And instead, I should save them for more value, like 2 cents per point. So if you're thinking about it in this mindset of by choosing to go for a higher value redemption rather than a low value redemption, if that low value redemption is something that was a trip I had to go on anyway, and I just paid cash for that, I basically bought the points at that lower value and used them for that higher value. Does that make sense?
Yes, I think it's a very good point. I agree with that like mindset, especially like as it's like when you're transferring points. Like I bought 30,000 Hyatt points for $300 effectively to like pay for this stay, right? And I would, if I had the ability to buy Hyatt points at 1 cent per piece, I would buy as many as I physically could. And so like that's what I effectively did. Like I didn't, literally buy them. I just transferred them over from Ultimate Rewards. But that's what I did. I, instead of, redeeming them at 1 cent per piece, I bought them at 1 cent per piece and then used them to pay for this hotel stay. Now this is worth $300 a night to me easily, but that's what I did. And like so if I would have gotten poor value out of my points, I would just be paying more for, whatever redemption I'm doing or like.
Exactly,
so
right?
Yeah.
And I would guess that you would be willing to pay 1.25 cents per point for Hyatt points, right? Since you can get much more value. And if that's the case, right, by choosing not to waste your points at 1.25 cents per point on the Chase Travel Portal redemption, instead transferring to Hyatt, I can also say that you bought the Hyatt points at 1.25 cents per point. Does that make sense?
That's correct.
Opportunity cost. Yeah. So this is why I think the notion that, I need to take this trip anyway, now that I use these points, I don't have to pay money anymore, is a completely kind of bogus logic, basically. Let's see. I think before we wrap up, I think there are a couple of important disclaimers about kind of what we're talking about. Of course, there are going to be exceptions, and we're making generalizations. For example, if you have very high spend and a lot of points, more than you can reasonably use for your high value travel each year, then yeah, it may make sense to cash out some of the points and invest it, or it may make sense to be okay with a lower cents per point value since you have so many points, can't use them anyway. But for most people, that's not really going to be the case given like a general sign-up bonus value or something. Sean, would you kind of agree with this general take?
I would 100% agree with that. And I'd also like add in like with that, the logic of So yeah, I would say 100% like if you have too many points where you can't even redeem them, then like everything flies out the window. Obviously, everything we're talking about is situational. So a lot of, any generalization we make could or could not apply to you depending on your specific situation. If you had, millions of dollars a month in spending, then saying, oh, you only should redeem your points at 3 cents per point minimum, that doesn't really make sense anymore. Like, okay, then you can cash them out. Then you can use it to lower values. Because I don't know how you would spend 3, billion points a month or whatever. That just doesn't seem feasible. So obviously there's like, it depends on your specific situation. And I think it's also interesting to think that like when you're like, this is also just like my final point I want to throw in about like buying points. When people are so against buying points, again, that's like what you're doing already. You're already buying points. You're already paying for it. You're just paying for like maybe a bit of a lower value than what they're publicly selling them for. But just because like they're, you could buy them doesn't mean it's actually costing you necessarily any more or less money, because you can cash out your points. You can use your points to higher value redemptions. Like you should always still consider that as like a tool to utilize of buying points, because it's not necessarily good or bad. It's just different math, and the math isn't as far off as you might think, because you can cash out points somewhat similar to what you can buy them at in certain programs.
Yeah, I completely agree. And yeah, I think that's pretty much it for today's episode. So, Sean, do you want to wrap us up?
Yeah, so if you enjoyed today's episode and you want to connect with an elite group of award travelers, check out the free Discord group at the link in the description. 100% for free. Very smart people in there. Deal alerts were dropping just a few weeks ago. I dropped a deal alert for a United Polaris airfare for $1,400 round trip from US to Europe. So if you want to see deals like that, join 100% for free. And also, if you want to help support the podcast, please consider using our affiliate links in the description for any credit cards you might apply for. It helps us out so much, you have no idea.
Yeah, and thank you so much for listening, and I hope to see you next week. Goodbye.